Hey, I'm Drew, and this is the Drew Peterson Podcast, home to one chairlift ride, ski pole microphone, and real story at a time. This chat is with Dillon Osleger, but it's the first one that's not a chairlift chat. This one is a bit of trail talk instead. Skiing is, after all, a seasonal pursuit, so I knew I'd have to switch it up eventually. And this episode with Dillon is the perfect opportunity to switch things up for the first time because I linked up with him to talk about his new book, Trail Work. So thus, why we're having a trail talk. Dillon Osleger is a lot of things. Seriously, I'll just read through an abbreviated list. He's a trail builder, earth scientist, writer, public lands policy wonk and analyst, geologist, professional mountain biker, and recro-ecologist. That one's my favorite. Trail Work is his debut book as an author. Its subhead, Restoring the Paths and Stories of America's Public Lands, captures it well. And like Dillon and all those identities he possesses, it really took a book to weave together the different perspectives he's built and learned from. It's a love letter to trails themselves, but it's seen through the lens of public lands, conservation, and a vision for the future of all the above. Before we drop in, a quick note from this episode's sponsor. Do you want a future with clean air, clean water, and a livable planet? Whoa! Crazy! Same here. In the US, 181 million Americans recreate in and love the outdoors. Protect Our Winters calls this the outdoor state. And together, folks like you, me, and our communities have the ability to act on climate. I've been part of the Athlete Alliance at Protect Our Winters for over 8 years at this point. To learn more, get involved, and join Team PAL, visit protectourwinters.org. All right, let's raise the bar. Keep your tips up and drop in. Dillon, we are beside the trail. We have an episode of, I guess, Between Two Stumps.
Yeah.
You got me off of a chairlift, so I guess we'll call this one Trail Talk. And it's very fitting because it's for your book, Trail Work. Reading the book and reading the synopsis of the book, I saw trails kind of as this vehicle of exploration, literally, metaphorically, in every sense. It kind of ends up being a love letter to maps and a nerdy confession of being a cartographer, and kind of an examination of public lands all at the same time. So you kind of frame it as the history of trails, the future of trails. How do you kind of make sense of that? And I've heard you also refer to some pieces of this as ethnogeography and recroecology. So what does that mean, and how does that come out in writing this book?
Oh man, I love that. I think I would start by saying I don't want to take credit for getting you off a chairlift. You can look around us at 7,000 feet elevation and see this is not my fault. This is March 17th in Truckee, just a really bad winter. But I'll take in between two stumps and near a trail. That's fine. This is less snow focused. I guess, yeah, it has its snow focus in it later. And more, bike and trail and run focused. Yeah, I think that was a beautiful synopsis, and just like staying true to this aspect. You asked me about my resume earlier, and I think it rhymes with the book in the sense of like, I've been really good at accidentally eschewing categorization my whole life by no fault of my own. Like I have a really hard time focusing on a single thing, and I think that's partially due to being a geoscientist, like as a background, and being in earth science is like, you're forced to see that nothing exists in a vacuum and that everything is kind of interrelated and interconnected, and you have to pay attention to different facets in order to understand any singular thing. And that kind of goes back to your questions about ethnogeography and recroecology. I just feel like in writing this book, and it kind of opened up eyes similar to journalism and journaling, is that reality that like recreation, no matter what the form is, like mountain biking, running, like swimming, surfing, pickleball, none of it exists in this like vacuum. And we've always treated it as just like recreation. And in reality, like at least for all of our mountain sports and like what we've made our careers in and all this stuff, like those are like, they are so dependent on understanding not only the landscape that we're in that given second, but where the infrastructure that we use came from. you know? And that's especially true for trails. Like in my book, I focus on hundreds, if not thousands of years of like the past that has given us the trails and the infrastructure that we use today for trail running or mountain biking. But even like I think about it when I'm skiing, you know, and I think about like ski resorts. Many of those have been around for 100+ years. And like, how crazy is it that, you know, the people who founded those resorts, like many of them are no longer with us. And like, I'm not much of like a ghosts guy, but I'm very much like, I very much believe in stories of the past that still exist in place. And I believe in like expressing those stories and remembering them. And so that's kind of like that idea of recreecology, is tying recreation to ecology, or ethnogeography, of tying ethnography and past and generations and culture to place and geography.
Yeah. And trails are the vehicle.
Yes.
Or literally the path.
Literally the path.
Literally the path.
Yeah.
I also like, I viewed this kind of as a celebration of trail too, and which I really loved. If you've heard of Ricky Gates's Every Single Street, when I was living in Salt Lake City, I started doing this Every Single Trail project, where I tried to do every single trail within the Salt Lake watershed. I blew up my ankle. I never finished, but it got me all these places where I'm like, whoa, this trail hasn't, you know, had foot traffic in so many years. It's overgrown. It's not on half these maps. It's on only this one.
Yeah.
And I see that in a lot of kind of your anecdotes of kind of how you found your way into this passion. I want to ask you, because I view this also like in the realm of public lands and conservation, that you introduce in the book that trails kind of become this rallying cry for conservation in America in the modern age, starting kind of in the late 1800s. Yeah. And I couldn't help but then after that part in the book, read the rest, viewing trails as like almost like a gateway drug to caring about more than yourself, caring about the world around you. Do you think that trails can be more of this kind of common ground, more of this, as I put it, gateway drug, but I am an addict for conservation?
I'm all about it. Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful way to like view it, and a lens with it to read the book. And I think that's really like one of the things about, I should have started this episode by saying this is my first book. Like, I don't pretend I'm an expert here. I'm figuring this one out as I go. But one of the most beautiful things about writing a book is like, unlike a film or something where it's like very prescriptive, like you know what the lens you're trying to give a viewer. A book kind of evolves in a reader's own mind. And so like people find different lenses that like kind of resonate with them, with which to read the book as they start going. And that's like one of the most beautiful things that I've found in like any bit of writing, is it's not always like when I'm done, I'm like, oh, this was like the main point or like the main lens. And you realize there's actually like infinite lenses through which people can take something and find meaning. And that's the most beautiful part of any of these projects, is like, you know, it's 300 pages, but like, heck, toss out the chaff, like toss out what doesn't matter to you and like take what resonates and put that in your pocket, and hopefully it changes your day to day. But yeah, I think trails are this opportunity to, to like find that love and joy for conservation. I've thought for such a long time is like, you know, no one has ever like read John Muir and been like, I'm a conservationist now. Like, cause it's beautiful.
But do you think they've read John Muir and been like, let's frack this?
Probably not. Good point. Yeah. So the man's neutral. Good point. The man is neutral. But I think at the same time, it's like, what you said is right. It's like, you have to be out in a place to like, to feel the changes of the seasons, and like to keep spring from going silent, to like reference Rachel Carson. You know, I think there's this concept. And even right now, it's like, we're getting towards evening here. It's probably like 5:30 in the mountains, and like hearing the frogs and like toads start to sing, and you know, like like alders and the willows along the creek are starting to turn red from like winter gray, and you get chickadees and like song sparrows going, like that's spring in its own right. But like, I only know that, and I like get emotional around those feelings, around those sounds, like because I've been in it. And like, that's what trails give you, is like they help you understand place and like feel like you're a part of place. And they remind you that humans are such a part of nature. Like there's nothing we can do to separate ourselves from that. Just because we're also developers does not mean that we're not part of nature. And so, yeah, I mean, like part of my career has been building new trails to expand that equity and access and make sure everyone has trails, you know, to like find that love of conservation in nature, and then hope that like restoring historic trails or building new trails, that people find that love for their little place, and then that love kind of ripples. And as those ripples go out, they can kind of see why they should care about the Tongass or about these like big roadless areas that they may never visit, you know? But trails are a gateway to that understanding, for self and for place, but then also kind of like a pathway to caring about places you may never actually understand.
You use the word gateway, so I'm sticking with gateway drug
Good,
too.
that's in, we're in.
I hear the frogs and it takes me back to like the trails of like my youth, like in the forest behind my house. One of the themes in this book, with the history of trails, is also looking at where these trails come from. So I think that you do a good job as well of incorporating the indigenous history of especially Western North America, and California, where we are right now. But then also more in modern history of extractive industries, of mining, of logging, being the places that are, you know, creating these places. One of the things that was making me think in there was also how recreation itself can become an extractive industry. And you mentioned it briefly in the realm of being a professional mountain biker and literally profiting off of these public lands and off of trail. I was also thinking of it, it's also in a way extractive, of tourism dollars, of extractive, you know, I don't think experience is necessarily extractive, but photographs, you know, and I think some of the modern outdoor recreation economy becomes extractive. How do you view that, and how do you think that we can engage with public lands, and how do you think that we can enjoy trails in a manner that isn't necessarily extractive, but interactive?
Yeah. I started down that road, and like I tried to do my best to dig it out in the book. And I think it is this iterative and perhaps never-ending conversation in the outdoor industry. And I think parts of the book at least, were a way to open that door, just to have that conversation. Because I didn't want to open the door and then say, I have the answers. But you're right. Like, I think when it comes to timelines, I like to view landscapes and trails especially as, the word I typically use is palimpsest. And most people laugh and they're like, cool, dorky word, Dillon, which is true.
What does that mean?
Palimpsest. Okay, so palimpsest is it's basically this overwriting. So if you think about a piece of paper or like a tablet, words were written and then they were like covered up and written over again, and then covered up and written over again, or erased and written over again. And sometimes it's used with like old tablets from like Mesopotamia where they would reuse.
I was thinking Etch-a-Sketch.
Exactly. Etch-a-Sketch is a good one. So like think of it like Etch-a-Sketch. That's actually a really good one. Like if you think about an Etch-a-Sketch, like think about everything that's ever written, even though it's analog, right? It's non-digital. Everything that's ever been drawn or written on that Etch-a-Sketch is somewhere buried in that like third dimension in the Etch-a-Sketch. Trails and landscapes are the same thing. Like every time someone has walked on that forever, in time immemorial, that is buried in that analog sense of in that negative space where they have spread apart bush or kicked the detritus of dead trees, or an animal's trod, or a bird has eaten. It doesn't really matter. Or water has run, you know, like all of this is text written upon a landscape. And, you know, I think I did my best job of like doing what I could with the information I had at the time to try to reflect on indigenous history, on contemporary history. But that's infinite. Like, I think the older I get and the more questions I ask, the more I always realize I don't know. And all I can do is ask more questions, and they all lead to more questions, not answers.
And maybe too, like that's the answer.
That is
is more questions, and like accepting it as a process, and accepting like the exploration and the introspection as like part of the process. Do you want to hit anything else there?
I think what you just said is like pretty right, is that questions are the answer in that sense of like, I think a lot of people try to find themselves in trails or try and like find their own identity or see themselves out in like the outdoor industry. And if there's anything I've recognized from history and from looking at all these old maps and old diaries and all this other kind of data that's out there, is that trails, especially in North America, are this really beautiful reflection of our country as a whole and its immigrant self and its overwritten self. Like, so much of it is indigenous in origin. So much of it in California is Hispanic in origin from when the U.S. did not own this part of the world for a very long time. So much of it on the East Coast is written by people who were brought here against their will, honestly. The 1930s and the Civilian Conservation Corps, like, a lot of the West was like roads and trails and anything else was built by immigrants who were brought out here during a depression economically. And those histories are hidden, and sometimes they're overwritten with new names for trails and for places. But like, I think looking at that and asking questions, is this pathway to have more discussions about, do these trails perhaps have indigenous place names or indigenous names? Do they have Spanish names? Do they have other histories behind them that are not just this like conquest of the American West kind of rote to it? And like, things happen, it just happens all the time. Like, I even went out to Elko a month and a half ago for the National Cowboy Poetry Gathering. Beautiful time. One of the things I learned there, and this is like, I'm 31, I should not be learning this now. Like, I've lived out in the West my whole life. But like, a huge percentage of cowboys in the West were African American. And I was looking at place name maps of all black cattle drives where like there are other place names for across all of Nevada, Southern Oregon, California. I was like, I took so many pictures because I was like, why do I not know these places as these names, you know?
Dude, that is so cool. Once we're done, I'm going to ask you all about the Cowboy Poetry Gathering because I learned about that on some random FM radio station driving Highway 50 through Nevada.
Yeah.
With that, I kind of want to riff kind of on that extractive piece here. Is one of your many multifactorial identities and hats is and has been as a professional mountain biker. And I was surprised, but also appreciated in a sense, how little your career as a professional mountain biker was the lens that we saw this through. It became kind of the evolution of yourself and your identity that was actually the lens that we were seeing it through. What was that creative choice like?
Yeah, I think that creative choice just kind of came from a lot of just like personal choice and direction and emotional growth in that sense of like, how do I see myself and what have I learned over, God, a decade of racing bikes, more than a decade. I mean, my whole life of riding bikes. I think my mom told me the other day, like my first bike ride was at like 3.5 months or 4 months, which seems less than safe, but it's fine. It got me somewhere. And like,
dude, imagine how hard you would rip if you had Strider bikes.
I know.
Like, that's outrageous.
I know. People are going to be way better than I ever was. And that's like, I think that's the beauty of it is like, the book was just kind of natural. Like, I got asked a couple of times by my editor and by others of like, do you want to insert more about like professional mountain biking or make it more bike focused? And, you know, like, I like letting people find themselves. And I also don't want to preach too heavily at people. I just want to give people tools to like ask questions and think about what matters to them. And there's no wrong answer. Like, I do think things can be extractive and recreation can be extractive. But it can also, like, no one expects anyone to be perfect if you're not like given these opportunities of questions, like none of us were at like a really young age. And it's all iterative. It's all a process. And yeah, I mean, you know, I think riding bikes as a career was always beautiful, but I think I've always had this idea in my head from year 2 of racing bikes and getting a paycheck for it of like, when I was growing up, the way I understood mountain biking and hiking and fly fishing and all these things was this like equilateral triangle where it was like the sport and the community was one point of that equilateral triangle. Competition was another. And then, you know, maybe you'd have environment as like a third. And those would somewhat be equal when you're a kid. And then as you grow up, you start to see that triangle starts to really heavily go towards competition and like professionalism. And like, you really lose like the community side and the culture side, but you also really lose the environment side. I hated that. Like, that wasn't why I was there, you know? It's like, I only got into it because I wanted to travel and like go to other places and like see other communities and see other environments. And then I realized that wasn't the point at all. And I was just going to the same places again and again just to race and like be disappointed or be happy, but like only for a split second. And like the whole choice to kind of like, I don't want to say exclude, but like not hyper focus on like a professional sports career, at least in the book, was just like, I want anyone to see themselves in this. Like, I don't care if you've ever raced a bike or been a professional athlete, or if you just like going out with your kids, or like you maybe don't really like trails and maybe you like running on bike paths, you know, like, heck, that's all cool with me. But I think one thing I thought about after films and all this other stuff was just like, I want the book to be for anyone, whether they're like aspirational or they're happy where they're at, or they're disillusioned. Anyone should be able to read it and kind of like I said, I guess earlier, is just ditch the chaff and find what resonates, you know?
And it's iterative, like you said.
Yeah.
It's constantly an evolution. I love that. I think listeners of the podcast will also know that I refer to myself as a recovering professional skier.
Exactly.
Still technically do it, but it's not really like my whole identity for sure, and it's barely a fraction of the identity at this point. And I think that comes through in your writing, that you are this multifactorial human, and that you've built so many different passions and different viewpoints on the world and on trail. And I think it's really beautiful how that comes through. And to that answer, you said it well, that trails end up being for everyone. And the viewpoint you provide gives that. So this has ended up being longer than a chairlift ride. So it's kind of like comparable to like a broken gondola ride. So I want to ask you 2 more questions, but we got to go kind of quick hit answers so that we can go skiing. Okay.
We'll run down this hill, I promise.
So first question is, it ends up a little bit in the book. We first connected through lobbying for climate action in Washington, D.C. with Protect Our Winters. I got to see you in action in the Capitol building, in the Department of Interior, in the Department of Energy, while I'm literally straddling missiles telling people to take a funny picture of me. You're just a freaking boss in a suit with a bolo tie. How in the world are you so comfortable in that situation? Remember, short answer.
Short answer, I'm not. I think I've just gotten used to the fact that like riding missiles and like taking photos is the fun part, and like everyone's a human. And I think the reality that I've come to with like lobbying is just being able to tell stories. And like trails, like trail work is, if I'm doing trail work the way I want to do it and I'm doing it right, I'm telling a story. And it's not just about myself, it's about the past and about place. It's all lobbying is like getting people to understand why I care so much about a freaking place beyond just riding my bike on it.
That's it. Telling stories. Now you're writing a book, publishing a book.
All
That's
stories.
Wonderful. I want to end with this, is share with me, share with the listeners, what's the difference between a road and a trail?
Okay. Yeah. So I guess starts with, it doesn't matter what the width of something is or the surface that it has, whether that's asphalt, bitumen, or dirt. The reality that I've kind of come across when we think about outdoor recreation and where we are in place is that a road is a bridge across a landscape. It's a route from point A to point B meant for expediency, meant for getting there fast and easily. A trail is instead going from point A to point B. It is a physical representation of a relationship between people and place, or animals and place. We are animals and nature. So yeah, I think letting people understand that bike paths and paved running on roads, single track, whether it's gnarly or pretty buff, it's all, as long as you're understanding how it relates you to the place you're in, it's an outdoor sport. It's trail. So, yeah.
Cheers to trails.
Cheers to trails.
Thank you for writing a wonderful book, Dillon. Thanks for expanding my understanding of the history and the future of trail, and also my own relationship with every trail that I interact with this summer and beyond is going to be shifted by reading your book. Thanks, man.
Good stuff, buddy.
Thanks to Dillon for joining me for some trail talk. Man, I could have talked with Dillon for hours about his book. My greatest takeaway from the conversation and from the book is that the deeper our relationship with trails and public lands, the richer our own experience, and the better stewards we will be of preserving, restoring, and loving these beautiful spaces. I got to read an advanced copy of Trail Work, and I highly, highly recommend giving it a read. The book actually releases today, so if you're interested, go buy one. And as Dillon's friend, I'm also going to add that buying a book during publishing week helps immensely. So I actually pre-ordered one when I was reading that advanced copy. You can, of course, buy a copy wherever you get books, and you can check out more from Dillon at his website, dillonosleger.com, or by following him on Instagram at dillon.osleger. Thanks to Protect Our Winners for supporting this episode. Join Team PAL at protectourwinners.org, because part of acting on climate is protecting public lands. Any discounts from all of the podcast sponsors are available on my website and wherever links live. Follow me and the show on Instagram at Drew Peterski, and you can also subscribe to the weekly newsletter via Substack. And of course, all of that is linked in the show notes. That's it for this ride. Thanks for listening to the Drew Peterson podcast. I guess I need a non-ski sign-off. So for today, I'll go with ski, play, protect, love, bike, run, and enjoy, my friends.